August 5th, 1993, early afternoon on a scorching summer day in South Philadelphia. Two young men in shorts and sneakers are walking near 6th and Catherine Streets in the heart of the neighborhood they grew up in. Joey Merlino, 31 years old. Michael Ciancaglini, 30. Gunmen open up on them in broad daylight, and the block dissolves into screaming and gun smoke. Ciancaglini, the one they called Mikey Chang, takes a bullet to the chest and goes down on the pavement. He doesn't survive. Merlino is hit and falls beside his best friend, bleeding on the same streets his father once ruled. The shooters vanish into the city, and in that moment, Philadelphia's Mafia war has its martyr, its survivor, and its future. If you've watched Netflix's Mob War, Philadelphia versus the Mafia, you've seen that corner. You've heard the wiretaps and watched the surveillance footage. But the 3 episodes only scratch the surface of the man at the center of it. Joseph Skinny Joey Merlino, the underboss's son who refused to kneel to a Sicilian don, survived a war that filled cemeteries and courtrooms, beat every murder charge the government ever threw at him, and then did something no mobster of his generation managed. He got old, got famous, and got a podcast. This is the complete story of Joey Merlino and the bloodiest chapter in modern Philadelphia crime. The collapse of Nicky Scarfo's psychotic regime. The rise of John Stanfa. A war fought with drive-by shootings, highway ambushes, and betrayals inside the same family bloodlines. And one crucial rule for everything you're about to hear. In this story, some things were proven in court, and some things were only ever alleged by prosecutors and turncoats. We will tell you which is which, because with Joey Merlino, that difference is the whole game. And here's the hook. Every boss in this story ended up dead, in a cell for life, or on the witness stand. Every single one except the skinny kid who was supposed to die on Catherine Street. Ask yourself how that happens. To understand the war, you have to understand the wreckage it grew from. Through the 1980s, the Philadelphia family was run by Nicodemo Scarfo, a tiny, vicious boss who murdered his way through his own organization and even tried to shake $1 million out of a waterfront developer with a city councilman as his bagman. Scarfo's paranoia produced bodies, and bodies produced witnesses. In November 1988, a federal jury convicted Scarfo and more than a dozen of his men in a sweeping RICO case, and he drew 55 years. His own nephew and underboss, Phil Leonetti, flipped the following year. The family that Angelo Bruno had run quietly for 2 decades was now a smoking crater. And standing in that crater was a generation of young South Philly guys whose fathers and uncles were dead or in prison because of Scarfo. One of them was Joey Merlino. Merlino was born on March 16, 1962, and the life was his inheritance. His father, Salvatore Chucky Merlino, had been Scarfo's underboss before Scarfo turned on him too, and he died decades later still in federal custody. Joey grew up small, quick, and magnetic. A gambler and a night owl who knew every bartender on Passyunk Avenue. People genuinely liked him, and that detail matters more than any of the mythology. In a neighborhood that had learned to fear the mob under Scarfo, Skinny Joey signed autographs. He was also a degenerate sports bettor by his own crowd's affectionate description, a guy who could win and lose thousands on a Sunday, which tells you something true about him. The life, for Joey, was never really about discipline. It was about action. He also worked. In the late 80s, he was convicted in connection with an armored car robbery that netted roughly $350,000, and he went to prison as a young man with a name, a grudge list, and a following. And one Halloween night stands as the moment the old era learned to fear the new one. On October 31st, 1989, Nicky Scarfo's own son, Nicky Jr., was eating dinner at Dante and Luigi's restaurant on South 10th Street when a man in a Halloween mask walked in carrying a trick-or-treat bag, pulled a machine pistol out of it, and shot him repeatedly at the table. Scarfo Jr. survived. The shooter was never caught. Years later, informants pointed at Joey Merlino. He was never charged with it, and he has always denied it. So file it where it belongs, in the column of legend and allegation. What nobody disputes is the message the neighborhood took from it. The Scarfo name no longer protected anyone. By the time Merlino came home from prison in the early 90s, the family had a new boss, just not one anybody his age had chosen. John Stanfa was Sicilian-born, a stone-faced survivor in his early 50s who had been Angelo Bruno's driver on the night in 1980, March 21st to be exact, when a shotgun blast killed Bruno in his car outside his home on Snyder Avenue. Bruno's successor, Phil Testa, lasted a year before a nail bomb tore through his porch in March 1981, and Scarfo rose from that blast. Stanfa, for his part, did prison time over his grand jury testimony, kept his mouth shut, and in 1991, with the blessing of New York's families, he took over Philadelphia. On paper, it made sense. He was old world, disciplined, connected to Sicily. On the street, it was a disaster, because Stanfa was a stranger demanding tribute from a neighborhood that had just bled for a decade under the last boss. Merlino and his friends, the crew the papers called the Young Turks, looked at this imported Don and asked a simple question. Who is this guy? Meet that crew. Because the war was fought by people, not factions. Michael Mikey Chang Chancaglini, powerfully built, respected on both sides, was the son of a jailed capo, and his own family split down the middle. His brother Joseph, called Joey Chang, went with Stanfa and became Stanfa's underboss. Blood against blood. Stephen Mazzone and George Borghese rounded out Merlino's inner circle, neighborhood guys in their 20s bound to Joey since childhood. What did they want? Respect, sure, and revenge for their fathers. But at street level, this war was about something you can count. The street tax. Here's how that scheme works, step by step, because it's what everyone was actually shooting over. The opportunity is that South Philadelphia ran on illegal gambling, bookmakers and numbers writers and video poker machines in the back of bars, a single machine reportedly clearing as much as $1,000 a week. The rule of the family is that every operator pays for the right to operate. The execution is collection, a weekly or monthly envelope from every bookie in the territory, by courtroom accounts running from hundreds into thousands of dollars a month for the biggest offices. The money flows upward to whoever is recognized as boss, and the enforcement mechanism is the family's reputation itself, because a bookie who stops paying invites a visit, and that's the problem. Recognition is the entire asset. If the young guys don't recognize Stanfa, his envelopes stop. Two crews taxing the same bookies is not a philosophical dispute, it's a countdown. Remember the name John Vesey. He enters this story as Stanfa's most dangerous weapon, and he ends it as the man who destroys him. Stanfa understood the math, and in 1992 he tried the old world solution. He formally inducted Merlino and Mikey Chang into the family, making them made men under his authority, figuring the ceremony would buy their obedience. It bought him months. Insults were exchanged. Tribute was skimmed. And by early 1993, both sides were planning funerals. What happened next shocked even the FBI agents watching it unfold. On March 2nd, 1993, just before 6 in the morning, gunmen walked into the Warfield Breakfast and Luncheonette in the Gray's Ferry section, where Stanfa's underboss, Joey Chang Chancaglini, opened up each day and shot him multiple times. He survived, barely, left partly deaf and partly blind, finished in the life. And here's the insider detail that makes this case unique in Mafia history. The FBI had the luncheonette under electronic surveillance, and the Bureau's own equipment captured the attack as it happened. The crash of the door, the shots, the aftermath. Agents listened to a mob hit in real time. Prosecutors would later charge that shooting to the Merlino faction and understand what that meant inside one family. The alleged target list had a brother on each side. When the government finally put those allegations in front of a jury years later, Merlino was acquitted. What is beyond dispute is the wreckage. One brother maimed for Stanfa, and 5 months later, one brother dead against him. That was August 5th, 1993, the ambush we opened with. And this part is settled fact because the shooters themselves later confessed in court. They were Stanfa men, John Vesey and Philip Coletti, and their assignment was the leadership of the rival crew. Mikey Chang died. Merlino, wounded, lived. Time of death for the piece, if it ever existed, early afternoon, broad daylight, a residential corner. Stanfa had drawn first blood at the top, and everyone in South Philadelphia braced for the answer. It came 26 days later, and it came on a highway. On the morning of August 31st, 1993, Stanfa was riding through rush-hour traffic on the Schuylkill Expressway when a vehicle eased alongside with gun ports cut into its side panel. A detail straight out of a war zone. The barrels came through the holes and raked Stanfa's car. The Don was untouched. His 23-year-old son Joe, sitting beside him, took a bullet through the face that shattered his jaw. He survived. The attack was never pinned on anyone in a courtroom as far as Merlino is concerned, and when prosecutors later folded the war's violence into charges against him, juries said not guilty. What the ambush proved didn't need a verdict. Philadelphia's Mafia war was now being fought at 8 in the morning through commuter traffic, with the boss's own child bleeding in the front seat. Stanfa's response was rage in every direction, plots and counterplots, including bomb schemes that fizzled by the accounts cooperators later gave. But his real problem was structural, and it's the reason his side collapsed first. Stanfa's power lived in hired violence, and hired violence has a payroll. John Vesey, the man who shot Mikey Chang, was a tattooed South Philly brawler, not a made Sicilian, and Stanfa treated him like a disposable tool, slow-paying and slighting the most dangerous employee he had. Because of that, in January 1994, Stanfa's people lured Vesey to a meeting and shot him in the head at point-blank range. And John Vesey, shot in the head, fought. He battled his way out of the room, survived wounds that should have killed him twice, and made the only rational decision left. He called the FBI. The government's case against John Stanfa walked in off the street, with bullet fragments still in it. Vesey wasn't even the worst of it. For months, the FBI had been running one of the most audacious bugs in bureau history, a court-authorized microphone inside the Camden Law Office where Stanfa held his sensitive meetings, a place he believed was legally untouchable. It wasn't. Hour after hour of tape caught the old Don discussing the family's business in wartime. Stack the tapes on top of Vesey's testimony and the math was over. On March 17, 1994, federal agents arrested Stanfa, and the indictment swept up his faction wholesale. In November 1995, a jury convicted him across the board: murder, conspiracy, kidnapping, racketeering, and John Stanfa went away for life. He is still inside today, at a federal prison in Connecticut, a man in his 80s who won exactly one battle of the war he started. On the very morning his trial had opened in October 1995, John Vesey's brother Billy, who wasn't a player, was shot dead in his truck. Prosecutors eventually charged that murder to the Merlino side. The jury acquitted. The Vesey family buried a son either way. So by 1995, at 33 years old, Joey Merlino had outlasted Scarfo's era and beaten Stanfa's, and the throne of a battered family was his if he wanted it. What he did next, according to the government, was the smartest move of his career. He didn't take the title. An older mobster named Ralph Natale, just out of a long prison stretch where the two had bonded, stepped forward as boss of Philadelphia. Prosecutors and agents described the arrangement bluntly. Natale was the lightning rod, the name on the door, while Merlino and his young crew ran the streets and the money. Natale has always insisted he was a real boss. Merlino denies there was anything to be boss of. What's documented is what happened to each man, and you can judge the org chart from the outcomes. The Merlino years were unlike anything the American Mafia had produced. While the FBI photographed him, Skinny Joey played celebrity. He threw Christmas parties for homeless Philadelphians and handed out hundreds of turkeys in the projects. He signed autographs at Eagles tailgates, ran with athletes, filled gossip columns, dated, dressed, and grinned through it all. Cameras loved him. So, allegedly, did the same old economy underneath. The bookmaking, the loan sharking, the stolen goods, the street tax, the machinery, prosecutors said, generated millions in wagers. And people kept trying to kill him. Law enforcement tracked plot after plot against his life through the 90s, and Merlino lived like a man who found the whole thing funny. The swagger was the brand. The brand was also bait, because every federal agency in Philadelphia now had the same target photo. The break came from the top of his own house. In 1998, Ralph Natale got jammed on a parole violation tied to a drug operation. And in June 1999, he did what no sitting American Mafia boss had ever done. He cooperated. The boss of Philadelphia, or at least the man wearing the title, became a government witness against his own family, and the indictment that followed put Joey Merlino on trial for his life's alleged work: murders, attempted murders, drug trafficking, racketeering. The trial in 2001 ran for months and became a Philadelphia obsession. A packed courtroom, daily headlines, Merlino's friends and co-defendants beside him, Mazzone and Borghese among them, and Skinny Joey playing to the gallery like it was Passyunk Avenue. And when the verdict came on July 20th, 2001, it landed like a split decision from heaven: not guilty on every murder. Not guilty on every attempted murder. Not guilty on the drugs. Guilty on racketeering, the gambling, the extortion, the stolen property. The jury had looked at Ralph Natale, the star witness, and largely refused to buy what he was selling on the blood. That December, Merlino got 14 years. He served about 11. Not one day of it was for killing anyone, and that fact is the spine of his entire public identity to this day. He walked out in 2011 and moved to Boca Raton, Florida, announcing a new life: golf, sunshine, a restaurant trading on his own name. Retirement, he called it. The government never believed him. In 2016, prosecutors in New York swept him into a huge East Coast racketeering case with dozens of defendants. The trial ended with a hung jury, and in 2018, Merlino pleaded guilty to a single illegal gambling charge and took 2 years. By 2020, he was out again, pushing 60, and this time the reinvention went fully public. A podcast, The Skinny, with Joey Merlino himself behind the microphone. A cheesesteak shop under his own name at 3020 South Broad Street. Interviews, appearances, merchandise. In October 2025, Netflix released Mob War: Philadelphia versus the Mafia. 3 episodes built on the wiretaps, the surveillance footage, and first-hand interviews with the investigators who worked the war, the journalists who covered it, and the survivors, including John Vesey telling his own story on camera. The man the series orbits around still denies he was ever in the Mafia at all. Law enforcement officials, for their part, have spent years alleging he never really left. Both of those things cannot be true, and after 3 decades, no jury has ever settled it. Count the ledger of the war Joey Merlino survived. Mikey Chang, dead at 30. Billy Vesey, dead, his murder charged but never legally solved. Joey Chang, maimed. Joe Stanfa, shot through the face at 23. John Stanfa, life plus forever. Ralph Natale, a cooperating witness whose testimony juries doubted. Nicky Scarfo died in prison. Chucky Merlino died in prison. And Skinny Joey sells cheesesteaks on Broad Street and talks into a microphone for subscribers. Whatever else is alleged and unproven, that outcome is real, and in the modern history of the American Mafia, it is close to unique. So what does this story actually reveal? That the mob's last war in Philadelphia wasn't about honor or tradition. It was a tax dispute settled with guns, old world authority against neighborhood loyalty, and neighborhood loyalty won because Stanfa rented his soldiers while Merlino grew his. It reveals that in the RICO era, the courtroom is the real battlefield, And Merlino's genius, whatever you believe about him, was understanding that charisma works on juries, too. And it reveals the strange final form of the American gangster. The life Merlino was born into is a shell of itself, and The Last Man Standing from its last great war now monetizes the mystery of what he did or didn't do. Joey Merlino was supposed to die on Catherine Street at 31. Instead, he buried the war, beat the verdicts that mattered, and turned the question mark over his own life into a business. The old bosses demanded that nobody ever say their names. Skinny Joey put his on the menu. That might be the most honest measure of what happened to the American Mafia. Its last famous son survived by becoming the one thing the old men swore they'd never be: content. If this story grabbed you, hit subscribe. We drop a new mob documentary every week. And drop a comment. Which figure from the Philly mob should we cover next?